The night Claire Sutter showed up on my porch, I had a beer going flat on the counter, drywall dust caked under my fingernails from a job that ran 4 hours late, and absolutely no idea I was about to agree to spend a weekend pretending to be a man who had been dead for 8 months. Ryan Sutter was that man. My best friend since we were 19 years old and too dumb to be scared of electricity. We came up together on the same line crew, learned to read a storm the way other men read a newspaper, learned which foreman would cover for you on a Monday hangover and which one would write you up for breathing wrong. Ryan married Claire Hale 6 years ago in a backyard wedding with string lights and a DJ who played the wrong song for the first dance twice in a row, and I stood next to him in a rented suit that pinched at the shoulders and meant every word when I told the room I had never seen a man luckier than Ryan Sutter. We'd worked storms together in 6 different states, slept in the same motel rooms on restoration crews when the power went out for 100,000 people at once and nobody cared what time it was as long as the lights came back on. Ryan used to say the two of us climbed better as a pair than either of us climbed alone, because he watched my footing and I watched his hands, and between the two of us we hadn't dropped anything that mattered in 11 years. I believed that the way you believe things you've never had a reason to test. Then the wind tested it, on a night neither of us should have been up on poles at all, and I found out exactly how much of that belief had been true and how much of it had just been 2 young men who hadn't been unlucky yet. 8 months before that knock on my door, Ryan went up a pole during a storm restoration job outside of town, and he didn't come back down the way he was supposed to. I'm not going to walk you through the rest of it. I've walked through it enough times in my own head at 3 in the morning that I don't need to do it here for anybody. What matters is that I buried my best friend on a cold Tuesday in January, wearing a coat that used to be his because I couldn't find my own that morning, and Claire stood beside me at the graveside not saying much of anything, and for months after that, neither did I. So when I opened my door on a Thursday night in September and found Claire standing there with her hair pulled back messy and her eyes red in the specific way that told me she'd been crying in her car before she worked up the nerve to knock, my first thought wasn't romantic. It wasn't anywhere close to that. My first thought was that something had gone wrong, because in my experience by then, that's what late knocks usually meant. Claire. I stepped back to let her in without asking. What happened? She didn't answer right away. She walked past me into my kitchen the way she'd done 100 times when Ryan was alive, except this time her hands were shaking, and she was holding her phone so tight her knuckles had gone pale. "It's my grandmother," she said. "It's Nana Vivian." I put the kettle on because I didn't know what else to do with my hands, same as I imagine most men do in that situation. Claire sat down at my kitchen table, the one Ryan used to put his boots up on until Claire smacked them down every single time, and she stared at the wood grain like it owed her an answer. "She had a stroke 2 weeks ago," Claire said. "A small one. The doctor said her heart's not doing what it should either." He said, her voice caught. He said we should start thinking in weeks, not months. I sat down across from her. "I'm sorry, Claire. I didn't know. Nobody outside the family knows yet. We've been trying to keep her calm. Stress makes it worse. Any kind of shock, any kind of..." She stopped and pressed the heel of her hand against one eye. "She has dementia too. Has for 2 years now. Some days she's sharp as anything. Other days she's back in 1994 asking why her husband hasn't come in for supper yet." I nodded slowly, not sure yet where this was going, only sure that it was going somewhere I wasn't going to like. "The thing about her dementia," Claire said, "is that she forgets things and then she has to be told them again. New things. Sad things. Every single time is the first time for her." She looked up at me, and I finally understood the shape of what she was about to ask before she said it out loud. "Nate, she doesn't remember that Ryan died." The kettle started to whine behind me. I let it. "She's asked about him 4 times since the funeral," Claire said. 4 separate times, we've had to tell her all over again that her granddaughter's husband is gone. And every single time, it's brand new grief for her. My mom said the second time, Nana cried so hard she couldn't breathe right for an hour. The doctor told us after the 3rd time that a shock like that, on top of her heart the way it is now, he said it could be the thing that actually takes her. Not the stroke. The grief. I turned the burner off and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything smart to say to that. "So we started telling her he was working," Claire said quietly. Out of town on a job. She'd nod, and she'd forget by the next morning that she'd even asked, and it kept her calm. It felt cruel and it felt like the only kind thing we could do at the same time, and I know how that sounds. It doesn't sound cruel, I said. It sounds like you were trying to keep her alive. Claire's eyes filled up, and for a second she looked like she might come apart right there in my kitchen the way she hadn't let herself come apart at the funeral. Then she pulled it back, the way I'd watched her pull it back 100 times over the last 8 months, like she'd made a private rule somewhere that grief was something you did alone, later, in the car. This weekend is the family reunion out at the orchard, she said. Every year, the whole family goes out to Nana's place for the harvest weekend. She's hosted it for 40 years. This is going to be the last one. Everybody knows it, even if nobody's saying it out loud. She took a breath. And for 2 weeks now, all she's talked about is seeing Ryan there. She keeps telling my mother she has something to give him. She keeps saying it like it matters more than anything else she has left to do. Claire. I know what I'm about to ask you, she said. I've been sitting outside your house for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to not ask it, and I couldn't find a way, so I'm just going to say it. She looked at me straight on, the way you look at somebody when you've already decided you're not going to flinch. I need somebody to be Ryan for one night. Just Saturday. Just the dinner. You're the only person I know who's close enough to his height, who has hands like his from the same kind of work, who she already knows and loves. I need my grandmother to see somebody who feels like Ryan being there before she dies, Nate, and I don't have anybody else to ask. I sat there for a long moment listening to the kettle tick as it cooled. You want me to lie to a dying woman, I said finally. I want to give her one more good night, Claire said. I want her to give whatever it is she's been holding on to somebody, instead of dying still holding it. I know it's insane. I've told myself it's insane 40 different ways since I thought of it. But I keep landing in the same place. She raised me. She's the reason I know how to stand up straight when everything else is falling down. And I can't give her back her granddaughter's husband. I can't give her back the truth without maybe killing her faster. But I might be able to give her one more Saturday that feels like the life she thinks we're all still living. I thought about Vivian Hale, who I'd met a handful of times over the years at Sutter family cookouts and one long, loud Thanksgiving. A small, sharp-eyed woman who wore her silver hair in a braid down her back even in her 80s, who had built an apple orchard out of 30 acres of scrubland with a husband who died young and kept it running through every hard winter after on stubbornness alone. I remembered her pulling me aside once at that Thanksgiving, squeezing my forearm with a grip stronger than it had any right to be, and telling me that a man who shows up quiet and does the work is worth 10 who talk loud and don't. I hadn't thought about that in years. It came back to me whole, sitting in my kitchen with Claire's eyes on me, waiting. Ask me why, Claire said, like she could feel me getting ready to say no. Ask me why it has to be you and not somebody who never knew him at all. Why? I said. Because you're the only other person alive who loved him the way I did, she said, and her voice cracked clean in half on the last word. You're not pretending to grieve him for her. You already are. I think that's the only reason this could ever feel true enough to matter. That answer went through me harder than anything smart or careful would have. If I do this, I said slowly, I need you to understand something. I'm not doing it to be a hero, and I'm not doing it because it's an easy thing to ask of me. I'm doing it because I loved him too, and because I think you're right that she deserves one more good night before whatever's coming comes. I looked at her. But we do this clean. No lies to each other about what it is. To your family, we do what needs to be done. Between you and me, we say it plain, every step. You tell me if it starts feeling like too much, and I'll tell you the same. Claire nodded, fast, then slower, the way people do when they're trying to make sure a promise actually lands somewhere real. Okay, she whispered. Okay, I said. Tell me about the orchard. I'd known Ryan Sutter longer than I'd known almost anybody. We grew up 2 streets apart, went through the same trade school apprenticeship, took the same entry test for the utility company on the same July morning, both of us sweating through our shirts in a testing center with bad air conditioning. He was the kind of man who whistled while he worked and never once let a bad day at a job site follow him home, at least not that anybody could see. He used to say the trick to marriage was the same as the trick to climbing. You didn't look down at everything that could go wrong, you just kept your hands moving and trusted your gear. I thought about that a lot in the days after his funeral. I thought about it walking through the hardware store buying things I didn't need. I thought about it lying awake at night in an apartment that had never once felt too quiet before he died and felt like nothing else since. Claire and I hadn't talked much in those 8 months. Not because either of us didn't want to. I think we both understood, without saying it, that being around each other meant being around the biggest hole in both our lives at the same time, and some weeks that felt like more than either of us could carry. We'd text on his birthday. She'd sent me a photo once of his old work boots still sitting by her back door, and I hadn't known what to say back, so I just sent her a photo of mine, sitting in the same sorry state by my own. Friday morning, 2 days before the Orchard weekend, she called me with instructions like she was briefing me for a job site. His family calls him Ree, she said. Not Ryan. You need to answer to Ree. Got it. He always sat on Nana's left at the table because his right ear was bad from being too close to a transformer explosion once, remember? I was standing next to him when it happened, I said. I remember. But sorry. Her voice caught for half a second, then steadied. He called her Nana V. Nobody else does that. It's their thing. Nana V, I repeated. Got it. And she's going to want to hold your hands, Claire said. She always did that with him. Turned his palms up and looked at the calluses like she was reading his fortune. She'll say something about how a man's hands tell you if he's worth trusting. I looked down at my own hands, scarred up the same as Ryan's had been from 11 years of the same work, and felt something in my chest tighten that I didn't have a clean name for. I can do that, I said. You don't have to be him, Claire said suddenly, like she needed to say it out loud before we went any further. I'm not asking you to erase yourself for 2 days. I just need you to let her see somebody who feels like him enough to make Saturday night gentle instead of another goodbye. If you slip up on something small, it's all right. She won't catch every detail. She just needs the shape of him there. The rest is going to be me, doing the actual work of managing it. I understand, I said. And I meant it. But some small, honest part of me wondered, driving out to the Orchard 2 days later with a duffel bag in the passenger seat and Claire's directions taped to my dashboard, whether I understood it as well as I thought I did. The Hale Orchard sat at the end of a long gravel drive lined with apple trees heavy with fruit, red and gold catching the late September light in a way that looked almost staged, like somebody had arranged it for a photograph. The farmhouse itself was white with green shutters, a wraparound porch worn smooth by 80 years of boots, and a hand-painted sign by the road that said Hale Orchards, E1961 in letters that had faded to almost nothing. Claire was waiting for me at the top of the drive, arms crossed against the early evening chill, wearing a flannel shirt that I realized with a small jolt used to be Ryan's. She watched me park and get out, and for a second neither of us said anything. You look nervous, she said. I've never impersonated a dead man before, I said. New experience. That got the smallest laugh out of her, more air than sound but real. Come on. Everybody's already inside. My mom knows the whole truth. My Aunt Carol half knows, she thinks you're a friend helping out, not exactly why. Nobody else knows anything. As far as the rest of the family's concerned, you're just Ryan's oldest friend, come out for the weekend same as always. And Derek? I asked, because she told me about Derek on the phone the night before, in a voice that had gone flat and careful in a way I recognized from talking about difficult foremen. Claire's jaw tightened. Derek doesn't know anything, and Derek doesn't need to. Derek's been circling this orchard like a vulture since Nana had her first stroke 2 years ago, trying to convince her she's not fit to run it anymore so my mom's side of the family, meaning him, can take it over. He married my sister Meg 12 years ago and decided somewhere along the way that meant he owned a piece of everything the Hales built. If he catches one whiff of anything unusual this weekend, he'll use it. That's just who he is. Understood, I said. I'll keep my head down. You won't need to, Claire said. You just need to be exactly what you already are. Ryan's best friend, come to help with the harvest, same as every year before. That part isn't even a lie. We walked up together, and I felt the weight of the next 2 days settle onto my shoulders like a coat 2 sizes too heavy. Vivian Hale was smaller than I remembered, sitting in a wingback chair by the fireplace with a quilt over her knees despite the warm evening, her silver hair still braided the same way down her back, her eyes still sharp enough to make you feel measured the second they landed on you. When Claire led me into the room, Vivian's whole face lit up in a way that hit me somewhere low in my stomach. "There he is," she said, reaching one hand out toward me. "Come here, sit by me. You've gotten thin. Are they feeding you out on those jobs?" I crossed the room slower than I meant to and took her hand. It was cool and light as paper, but her grip when she closed her fingers around mine was stronger than I expected, same as I remembered from years ago. "Hi, Nana V," I said, and the words came out easier than I thought they would, which scared me a little. She turned my palm over the way Claire had warned me she would, running one thumb over the calluses at the base of my fingers, nodding slowly like she was confirming something she already believed. "Still working like a man who means it," she said. "Good." She looked up at me, and for one long second her eyes held mine with an intensity that made the back of my neck go warm. "You look tired though. More tired than a job site should make a young man." "It's been a long year, Nana V," I said, which was the truest thing I said to her all weekend. She said, and let go of my hand and didn't push. "Sit. Claire, get him a plate before your aunt eats all the cornbread again." I sat. Claire's mother, a soft-spoken woman named Diane Hale who watched me across the room with an expression I couldn't fully read, grief and gratitude tangled together, brought over a chair from the dining table. Claire's Aunt Carol bustled through with dishes, throwing me a look that told me she knew something wasn't quite right but had decided not to ask what. And across the room, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed and a beer already in one hand, stood a man I hadn't met yet but recognized instantly from the way Claire's shoulders went stiff the second he walked in. Derek Marsh had the kind of build that came from a gym membership rather than actual work, dark hair combed back, a watch that cost more than my truck. He looked me over the way you'd look over a used car somebody was trying to sell you too cheap. "So this is the famous Nate," he said. "Heard a lot about you over the years. Never actually met you till now." "Good things, I hope," I said. "Depends who you ask." He smiled without much behind it. "Claire's told everybody you're just an old friend helping out for the weekend. That right?" Something in the way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up, like he already suspected there was more to the sentence than the words in it. "That's right," I said evenly, meeting his eyes and not backing off them. "Same as I do most years." Derek held my gaze a second longer than a normal person would, then shrugged and looked away first, like he'd decided I wasn't worth the effort just yet. "Oh, dinner's at 7. Nana likes everybody at the table on time. Don't be the reason she has to wait." He walked off toward the kitchen, and Claire exhaled slowly beside me. "That's Derek," she said, unnecessary at that point. "I got that impression," I said. Dinner that night was loud in the specific way big families get loud, plates passed hand to hand down a table too long for the room, 3 separate conversations happening at once, somebody's kid crying somewhere upstairs and somebody else's kid laughing too hard at a joke nobody else had heard. I sat at Vivian's left, same as Claire had told me Ryan always did, and did my best to answer questions about a job site I'd actually worked, because Ryan and I had worked half the same jobs over 11 years, which made most of it easier to hold on to than I expected. Vivian didn't say much during the meal itself. She watched more than she talked, the way I imagined she'd always done, running this family from a chair at the head of a table for 40 years. A few times I caught her looking at me with an expression I couldn't place, not confusion exactly, something quieter than that, something almost like she was working out a math problem behind her eyes. After dinner, when the dishes had been cleared and half the family had scattered onto the porch or into the den to watch a ball game, Vivian caught my sleeve as I stood to help clear plates. "Sit with me a minute, Ree," she said. "Just us." Claire, 3 feet away with an armful of dishes, went very still. I saw her make eye contact with her mother across the room, some silent conversation passing between them that ended with Diane giving the smallest nod. "Sure, Nana V," I said, and sat back down. The room emptied out slowly, people drifting toward the porch and the television, until it was just Vivian and me at the long table, the last of the evening light coming gold through the west windows. "I've been wanting to give you something," she said, and I keep forgetting where I put it, which tells you something about the state of things in this old head of mine these days." She smiled, a little rueful, a little sharp underneath it. "Claire, would you fetch the box from my dresser? The wooden one, top drawer." Claire's face did something complicated for half a second before she nodded and disappeared upstairs. Vivian turned back to me, and her eyes had gone soft in a way that made my chest ache before she'd said another word. "My husband gave me this orchard with nothing in his pocket and a lot of promises he didn't know yet if he could keep," she said. 40 years I ran this place. Some years good, some years I didn't know how we'd make it to spring. You know what got me through the bad ones?" "What's that, Nana V?" "Somebody steady," she said. "Somebody who showed up every morning whether the weather was good or not, and didn't need to be thanked for it, and didn't make a show of the load he was carrying." She reached over and patted my hand where it rested on the table. "I watched you and Claire's husband climb poles together for years before either of you had a lick of sense about anything else. I watched you two hold each other up through things that would have broken most friendships. That kind of steady is rare, rarer than people think." I felt my throat go tight in a way I hadn't expected, sitting there being called by a dead man's name and told I was steady by a woman I was actively lying to. It was the strangest kind of grief I'd ever felt, grief for Ryan, mixed up with something that felt uncomfortably like being seen for who I actually was underneath the lie. Claire came back down with a small cedar box and set it in front of her grandmother without a word, her eyes carefully not meeting mine. Vivian opened it slowly. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was a pocket watch, plain and worn, the kind of thing that had clearly been carried in somebody's pocket through decades of hard days. "This was my husband's," Vivian said. "He wore it every single day he worked this orchard, until the day he died. I've been holding on to it because I didn't know who deserved it yet." She lifted it out and pressed it into my palm, closing my fingers around it with both her hands. "I want you to have it, Ree. I want you to have something of his that reminds you what it means to be the kind of man a family can lean on. Because that's what you are to this one now. Whether you always meant to be or not." I sat there holding a dead man's watch, given to me under a dead man's name, by a woman who thought she was giving it to her granddaughter's husband, and I had to look down at the table for a long moment before I trusted my voice enough to speak. "Thank you, Nana V," I said finally. "I'll take care of it." "I know you will," she said, satisfied, and sat back in her chair like something important had been settled. "Now go find my granddaughter. She's been standing in that doorway for 2 minutes trying not to cry, and it's rude of both of us to pretend we don't notice." I found Claire out on the back porch a few minutes later, arms wrapped around herself against the cooling night air, staring out at the dark rows of apple trees. "You okay?" I asked. "That watch," she said, not turning around. "Ryan wanted that watch so bad. Nana kept telling him someday, and he'd just laugh and say someday better come before he was too old to enjoy carrying it." She let out a breath that shook a little on the way out. I didn't think it would be this hard. Watching her give it to somebody wearing his name. "I can give it back to her," I said quietly. "Tell her there's been a mistake that I don't." "No." Claire turned around fast. "No, don't. She needs to have given it to somebody. That's not for us to take back from her." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, rough, like she was angry at her own tears for showing up. "I just wasn't ready for how much it would hurt to watch. I thought I'd prepared for this." "I don't think there's a way to prepare for this," I said. "I think we're just doing the best version of an impossible thing." She looked up at me then, really looked, in a way she hadn't since I'd arrived. "Is it too much? Tell me honestly. If it's too much, we stop right now, and I figure out something else." I thought about it. I thought about Vivian's hands closing around mine at the table, about the way she'd looked at me like she was reading something true underneath a false name. I thought about how strange it was that grief and tenderness could sit so close together in the same chest that you could barely tell where one ended and the other began. "It's not too much," I said. "It's just more than I expected to feel." Claire nodded slowly, and for a moment neither of us said anything, the two of us standing on that dark porch with a dead man's watch heavy in my pocket and 8 months of unspoken grief sitting between us like a third person nobody had invited but everybody was used to by now. "Thank you," she said finally. For doing this. I know it's costing you something. It's costing both of us something, I said. That's probably why it matters. Saturday morning came in loud and bright, the whole family up early for the harvest work that gave the weekend its name. 3 generations of Hales moving through the rows with baskets and ladders, picking the last of the season's apples before the first hard frost. I fell into it easier than I expected, the physical rhythm of the work familiar enough from a lifetime of using my hands that I didn't have to think too hard about being anybody but myself. Derek worked the row next to mine for a stretch that morning, and I could feel him watching me more than picking apples. You and Claire's husband go way back, he said, not quite a question. 11 years on the same crew, I said. Longer than that as friends. Funny, Derek said, tossing an apple into his basket harder than necessary. Claire never mentioned you much before this year. I've been coming to these things for 12 years. Don't think I ever heard your name before this weekend. I kept picking, kept my voice easy. I work a lot of storm season. Doesn't leave much time for family reunions that aren't mine. Must be nice showing up now though, Derek said. Right when things are getting complicated around here. Nana's health, the trust, all of it. Real convenient timing for an old friend to suddenly make time. I stopped and looked at him directly. The way I'd learned a long time ago was the only language men like Derek actually respected. I'm here because a friend asked me to be here for her grandmother. That's the whole of it. If you've got a different theory, you're welcome to say it plain instead of picking around the edges of it in an apple row. Derek held my eyes for a second, then smiled the thin smile I was starting to recognize as his default setting. No theory. Just an observation. He picked up his basket and moved off toward the next tree. Nana's not as sharp as she used to be. Man could take advantage of that, if he wanted to. I watched him walk away and felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the morning chill. I found Claire an hour later loading crates onto the truck bed, and told her what Derek had said, word for word. He's fishing, Claire said, but her hands had gone still on the crate she was holding. He does this. Says something sharp, waits to see who flinches. I didn't flinch, I said. But I want you to know what he's circling before he circles closer. I know what he's circling, Claire said grimly. He's circling control of this orchard. Has been for 2 years, ever since Nana's first stroke. He's been telling my mother privately that Nana's declining fast enough that somebody needs to step in and manage the trust before she makes a mistake she can't undo. Meaning him. Meaning he wants to be that somebody. She set the crate down harder than it needed. And now with Ryan gone and me, in his words, unstable, he's been telling my mother I'm not fit to inherit my piece of it either. Like grief is a character flaw instead of just grief. That's a hell of a thing to say to a grieving woman, I said. He didn't say it to me, Claire said. He said it to my mother, quiet, over coffee, like he was doing everybody a favor by pointing out the obvious. That's how he works. Never says the ugly thing to your face. Just plants it somewhere it'll grow on its own. I thought about the watch in my duffel bag upstairs, about Vivian's hands closing around mine, about how much weight a single weekend could end up carrying if you let it. What happens Saturday night, I asked, if he notices something's off? Claire's jaw tightened. Then we deal with that when it happens. Tonight is for Nana. Derek is a problem for another day. I wanted to believe it would be that simple. Some part of me, watching Derek's black truck gleaming in the morning sun by the barn, already suspected it wouldn't be. Saturday night's dinner was the whole reason for the weekend, the one meal every year where the entire extended family crowded around 2 tables pushed together, where Vivian sat at the head in her best cardigan with her braid freshly done, where somebody always said grace too long and somebody always cried a little during dessert out of pure gratitude for another year together. This year, everybody at that table knew, without anybody saying it, that it might be the last one. I sat at Vivian's left. Claire sat across from me, close enough that I could watch her hands shaking slightly around her water glass through most of the meal. Vivian was quieter than the night before, tired in a way that showed in the slower movement of her hands, but her eyes stayed sharp, moving from face to face around the table like she was trying to memorize something. Partway through the meal, she set down her fork and looked at me for a long moment. she said, "tell me something true." The whole table's noise seemed to quiet without anybody actually stopping talking, the way a room does when it senses something important happening at its center. "What's that, Nana V? Are you happy?" she asked. "Not the kind of happy you tell people at dinner tables. The real kind." I felt Claire go still across from me. I felt Derek's eyes land on me from 3 seats down, sharp and waiting. I thought about lying easily, the practiced kind of lie I'd been telling all weekend, and found I couldn't quite make myself do it, not to her, not with that question sitting so plain and honest between us. "I've had a hard year, Nana V," I said slowly, choosing every word like it mattered because it did. Harder than I know how to talk about most days. But sitting at this table tonight, with this family, I think I'm closer to happy than I've been in a long while. It was, I realized as I said it, the truest sentence I'd spoken all weekend, even wearing a dead man's name. Vivian studied me for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted, so subtle I almost missed it, something that looked less like confusion and more like recognition. Then she reached over and patted my hand the way she had the night before. "Good," she said simply. "That's all I wanted to know." Derek's voice cut in from down the table, light, deliberately casual, the way a man sounds when he's about to say something he's been saving up. "Funny thing, Nana. Ree here's been at this table 2 nights now, and I don't think I've heard him say Ryan's name once. You'd think a man would talk about himself in third person a little, telling old stories, that kind of thing." The table went very quiet. I felt Claire's eyes snap to mine, felt her whole body go rigid across the table. I looked at Derek steadily. Man doesn't usually narrate his own life story at somebody else's dinner table, Derek. Didn't realize that was expected. "Just an observation," Derek said, the same phrase he'd used in the orchard that morning, smiling like he was enjoying himself. Vivian's eyes moved from Derek to me and back again, and for one terrible second I thought the whole fragile thing was about to come apart right there over the cornbread and gravy. Then Vivian said, very calmly, "Derek, pass the potatoes and mind your own plate," and the table let out a breath as one body, and the moment passed, though I noticed Derek didn't look satisfied so much as postponed, like a man filing something away for later use. After dinner, while the rest of the family scattered to the porch and the den, Vivian asked to be walked out to the orchard one more time before dark, to see her trees settle in for the night, as she put it. Claire and I walked on either side of her slow steps, one arm each under her elbows, out past the barn to where the rows of apple trees stood dark and heavy against the last orange light. "I planted the first 10 of these trees myself," Vivian said, "the year after my husband died. Everybody told me to sell the land and move into town where it'd be easier. I told them easier wasn't the same as right." She stopped walking and looked out over the rows, breathing slow. "This orchard is the only thing I ever built that outlived every hard thing that tried to take it down. I need it to keep outliving things after I'm gone." "It will, Nana V," Claire said softly. Vivian turned then, slow, and looked at Claire with an expression that made my chest ache before I understood why. "I know you're not Ryan's husband," she said quietly, and I felt the ground drop out from under both Claire and me at the exact same moment. "I have my bad days, Nate. I don't always have my good ones either, if I'm honest. But I've known for 2 nights now, sitting close enough to smell that you don't smoke the same cigarettes he used to sneak behind the barn, thinking I never noticed." Neither of us said anything. The orchard around us seemed to go completely silent, waiting. "Ryan's gone," Vivian said, gentle as anything I'd ever heard, "isn't he?" Claire's whole body started to shake. "Nana, I'm so sorry, I didn't want to." "Hush," Vivian said, and pulled Claire into her arms with a strength that surprised me, holding her granddaughter's shaking body against her own thin frame. "Hush now. I think some part of me has known for a while. I think I've known and forgotten and known again more times than any of you realize, and every time I forgot, some small true part of me stayed sad without knowing why." She stroked Claire's hair the way I imagined she'd done since Claire was small. "You wanted to protect me from one more heartbreak my heart might not survive. That's not a lie, sweetheart. That's love wearing a disguise. There's a difference, and I think somewhere in this old head, I've known that difference the whole weekend." "Nana, I'm so sorry," Claire whispered again. Don't be sorry, Vivian said. Be grateful we got this weekend at all. She looked over Claire's shoulder at me, and her eyes were wet but steady. Thank you for loving him enough to stand in his place for one night, and thank you for loving her enough to do it without asking for anything back. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. I'm not as far gone as everybody thinks, Vivian said, straightening up, wiping her own eyes with brisk efficiency, like a woman used to managing her own grief on a schedule. I know exactly what's happening on this land, and I know exactly what I want to happen to it after I'm not here to watch anymore. She looked at Claire, hard and clear. That orchard is yours, Claire Hale. Not Derek's. Not anybody who married into a name and decided that meant they'd earned a piece of what your grandfather and I built with our hands. Yours. I've already told the lawyer as much. I just haven't found the right week to make everybody sit still long enough to hear it. Nana. I mean it, Vivian said. And I want you to hear something else, while I've got the good sense to say it plain. She reached out and took both our hands, mine and Claire's, and pressed them together between her own smaller ones, cool and light as paper but sure as anything. Grief doesn't ask permission before it turns into something else, if you let it. I loved my husband 40 years and I still found room in this heart to love other people after he was gone. My children, my grandchildren, this land. Love doesn't run out just because you spent some of it already. Don't either one of you go feeling guilty over whatever this weekend woke up in you both. That's not betrayal. That's just a heart that's still working. Neither of us said anything. I don't think either of us could have. Now, Vivian said, letting go of our hands and straightening her cardigan with sudden brisk energy, walk me back inside before your Aunt Carol eats every last piece of that pie and blames it on the dog again. Sunday morning, I loaded my duffel bag into the truck while most of the house was still asleep, the orchard fog thick enough that the rows of trees looked like they were standing in smoke. Claire came out onto the porch in Ryan's old flannel again, a mug of coffee in each hand, and passed one over to me without a word. You don't have to keep wearing that, I said, nodding at the shirt, gentle as I could make it. Claire looked down at herself like she'd forgotten she had it on. I know. Some mornings it just feels like the right thing to reach for. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. I keep waiting to feel strange about all of it. This weekend. What she said to us out by the trees. I keep waiting for the guilt to show up loud enough to drown everything else out, and it just hasn't. Is that wrong? I don't think there's a wrong way to survive something like this, I said. I think you're allowed to feel whatever actually shows up instead of whatever you think you're supposed to feel. She was quiet for a moment, watching the fog move slow between the trees. Thank you for this weekend, Tate. All of it. The parts that were hard and the parts that weren't supposed to be as good as they were. I'm not sorry I came, I said, and meant every word of it. She walked me to the truck, and at the door she hesitated, like there was a sentence sitting right behind her teeth that she wasn't sure she had the right to say yet. In the end, she just reached out and squeezed my forearm, the same grip her grandmother had used on me at that long-ago Thanksgiving, strong enough to mean something. Drive safe, she said. Call me when you're home. I will, I said and did, and neither of us said anything more than that, because some things need time to become sayable, and neither of us was going to rush a thing that fragile just because a weekend was ending. Vivian Hale passed away 17 days later, in her sleep, in the same wingback chair by the fireplace where I'd first sat beside her wearing a dead man's name. Claire called me at 6 in the morning, her voice steady in the particular way people get steady when they've had time to see something coming. She went easy, Claire said. Mom found her with a book still open in her lap. The doctor said her heart just stopped, quiet, no pain that they could tell. I'm coming out, I said, already reaching for my keys. The funeral was 4 days later, and half the county came, because that's what happens when a woman spends 40 years building something that outlasts every hard winter anybody throws at it. I stood near the back, not wanting to take up space that belonged to family, until Claire found me in the crowd afterward and pulled me forward without asking, right up to where her mother stood. He was there for her at the end, the same as he was there for Ryan, Claire told her mother quietly. He doesn't stand in the back at this family's funerals. Not anymore. Diane Hale looked at me for a long moment, something working behind her tired eyes, And then she reached out and hugged me, brief but real. "Thank you," she said, "for the gift you gave her that weekend. I don't think I'll ever be able to properly thank you for it." The reading of Vivian's amended will happen 2 weeks after the funeral, in a small law office above the pharmacy in town, with old carpet and a lawyer named Mr. Alvarez who had handled the Hale family's affairs for 30 years and clearly had no patience left for Derek's opinions on anything. Derek showed up in a pressed shirt and an expression like a man who'd already spent the inheritance in his head. He sat with Claire's sister Meg beside him, her hands twisted together in her lap, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on earth. Mr. Alvarez read through the will slowly, methodically, and when he reached the section concerning the orchard, Derek leaned forward like a man expecting good news. The orchard property, all 31 acres, the farmhouse and the operating trust, Mr. Alvarez read, are to pass in full to my granddaughter, Claire Elizabeth Hale Sutter, on the condition that she continue to run it as a working orchard for no less than 5 years, and that she never sell any portion of it to satisfy another family member's personal ambitions. Derek's face went through several colors in quick succession. That can't be the whole document. Nana told me 2 years ago she was considering restructuring the trust to bring in more active management. I have emails. Mrs. Hale amended this will personally, 3 weeks before her death, in this office, with 2 witnesses present and a doctor's letter confirming her full mental competency at the time of signing, Mr. Alvarez said, in the flat tone of a man who had heard every version of this objection before and found none of them persuasive. I'd be happy to show you the documentation, Mr. Marsh, but I don't believe it will change the outcome. This is insane, Derek said, standing up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. She was sick. She had dementia, everybody in this room knows that. You can't tell me a woman losing her memory made a sound decision 3 weeks before she died. She was sharper in that meeting, Mr. Alvarez said quietly, than most men half her age I deal with in this office on a weekly basis. She knew exactly what she was doing, Mr. Marsh, and she told me exactly why she was doing it. And why was that? Derek snapped. Mr. Alvarez looked at his notes, then back up. She said, and I'm quoting her directly here because I wrote it down at the time, land built by love should stay with somebody who still knows how to love it, not somebody who only knows how to count it. The room went dead silent. Derek's jaw worked like he wanted to say something and couldn't find a version of it that wouldn't make him look exactly like what he was. Meg put a hand on his arm, quiet, and for the first time all weekend, I saw something like relief cross her face instead of loyalty to her husband's ambitions. You'll regret this, Derek said finally, looking at Claire. This orchard's going to run you into the ground without proper management. You'll be begging me to help within a year. Claire, sitting straight in her chair with her hands folded calmly in her lap, looked back at him with an expression I recognized from watching her grandmother do the same thing to men twice her size for 2 solid days. Maybe, she said. But it'll be my mistake to make, on land my grandmother trusted me with. That's more than you ever offered her, Derek. You offered her management. She wanted somebody who'd love it the way she did. Derek grabbed his jacket and walked out without another word. Meg lingered a moment, looked at Claire with something that might have been the beginning of an apology, and then followed her husband out the door. Claire let out a long, slow breath once the door shut behind them, and looked over at me for the first time since the reading had started. That's the orchard settled, she said quietly. I don't know what to do with the rest of what she left me to figure out. You don't have to figure out all of it today, I said, echoing something I'd told her once before, on a very different day, about a very different kind of loss. Tomorrow, you figure out another piece. Then another. That's how everybody does it. Claire almost smiled. You've said that to me before. I meant it both times, I said. Winter came and went slower than either of us expected, the orchard quiet under snow, both of us finding reasons to see each other that started out as helping, fixing a fence line the deer kept getting through, hauling firewood, checking on the trees during a hard freeze, and slowly stopped needing an excuse at all. We didn't rush anything. I think we both understood, without needing to say it out loud, that whatever was growing between us had roots tangled up in the same grief, and untangling something that honest took time neither of us was willing to shortcut. There was a night in February, sitting on the same back porch where Vivian had told us the truth she'd apparently known all along, when Claire finally said what we'd both been circling for months. "I feel guilty sometimes," she said, watching snow fall soft over the dark orchard rows. "Like loving you means I loved him less. I know that's not how it actually works. Nana told me herself it wasn't how it works. But some nights the guilt shows up anyway, uninvited." "I feel it too," I said. "Some nights I still reach for my phone to text him something funny that happened on a job site, and then I remember, and then I feel guilty about you in the same breath, like I'm not allowed to be sad about him and glad about you at the same time." "Are you glad about me?" she asked, quiet, not looking at me. "I think I have been for longer than I let myself admit," I said. "I think I started being glad about you somewhere around a wingback chair and a pocket watch, and I've been trying to talk myself out of it ever since because it felt disrespectful to a man I loved." Claire turned to look at me then, eyes wet in the porch light. "He'd want this," she said. "I know that with the same certainty I know anything. Ryan never once in his life wanted anybody he loved to stay stuck grieving him instead of living." "No," I agreed. "He wouldn't." "Nana knew it before either of us did," Claire said. "I think that might be part of why she asked what she asked that first night at the table. I think she wanted to see if it was already there." I thought about Vivian's hands closing around mine, about her asking me, plain and direct, whether I was happy, in front of a table full of family and one particularly hungry vulture. I thought about the way she'd looked at both of us in that dark orchard, pressing our hands together between her own. "I think you're right," I said. Claire reached over and took my hand, the same hand Vivian had once turned palm up and read like a fortune, and this time there was nothing pretend about it at all. We were married the following autumn, in the orchard, under trees heavy with fruit the same way they'd been the weekend everything started. It was small, just family, the ones who'd earned the right to stand there, which meant Derek and Meg received an invitation Meg quietly declined on both their behalfs, no hard feelings needed on either side by then. Diane Hale walked Claire down a row of trees her mother had planted with her own 2 hands 40 years before I was ever born, and I stood waiting at the end of it wearing my own suit this time, no borrowed coats, no borrowed names. In my jacket pocket that day was a pocket watch that had belonged to a man I never met, given to me under a name that wasn't mine, by a woman who saw straight through the lie to the truth underneath it before either of us was brave enough to see it ourselves. I still carry it. Not because I'm pretending to be anybody I'm not anymore, but because some gifts stop being about the reason they were given and start being about everything that grew out of the giving. People ask us sometimes how we found our way to each other, and Claire usually says it started with her grandmother's dying wish. I usually add that it actually started with a lie neither of us was proud of, that turned into the most honest thing either of us had ever done for somebody we loved. Both of those things are true. Neither one is the whole story. The whole story is that sometimes the people closest to death see the truth clearest of anybody left standing, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for somebody you love is stand in for exactly the shape of what they're missing, long enough for them to say goodbye properly, and long enough for you to find out what was quietly waiting for you on the other side of that goodbye the entire time. What would you have done if your best friend's widow knocked on your door and asked you to become him, just for one night, just for a dying woman's peace of mind? And have you ever kept a hard secret to protect somebody you loved from a truth you were afraid might break them for good? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this one got to you the way it got to me writing it, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.